From 18 to 40 volts, everything is available. Accordingly, the decision is likely to be difficult. At least, that's how it was for me personally. That's precisely why I thought I'd do a comparison video of these three battery-powered multifunctional drives for you. To see where the real differences lie between these three devices, what advantages and disadvantages each device has to offer, and of course, to find out which multifunctional drive one should ultimately choose. For this reason, I'd say let's start with the video right away, but if you haven't done so already, definitely subscribe to the channel for free and activate the bell to not miss any new videos in the future. You can find the current prices of these three devices in the video description below. Thank you very much for your participation, and now let's get started after the intro. A multifunctional drive is quite a practical thing, not least because of the diverse attachments that we can attach to the front of the respective multifunctional drive. Everything is available from the typical trimmer attachment to the cultivator attachment for soil work. However, the question arises, which multifunctional drive should I get? Because depending on the attachment I have on the front here, different power levels are naturally required. While a typical hedge trimmer attachment with small branches requires little power, this attachment here, the cultivator attachment, requires significantly more power. For this reason, the decision between these three devices is difficult once again, and that's exactly why we want to take a look at how these three devices differ, both in terms of technology and performance, in today's video. That's why I'd say we can put these two attachments aside for now, because the main focus is now on the three multifunctional drives that we will now examine in detail. I will discuss the respective attachments later in the test. Therefore, these two can be set aside for now, and now we're mainly concerned with these three multifunctional drives. Before we dive into the comparison, I suggest we first take a look at what kind of multifunctional drives we have here in the first place. As I said, everything is available from 18 to 40 volts, so right at the front, we can see the pure 18-volt multifunctional drive, the DUX 18. Next is the 36-volt version with two 18-volt drives, the DUX 60, and the 40-volt variant, the XGT model, namely the UX 01. By the way, I've already introduced these three devices separately. If you haven't watched these videos yet, definitely take a look at them again. I'll link them for you up here on the info card because today's video is solely about the comparison of these three models, meaning I won't talk about the specific details again. As you can see, there are already certain differences externally between these three multifunctional drives, and I'm not talking about the turquoise casing, black rubber casing, or black handles. No, I'm specifically referring to the size here. Because, as you can see, the DUX 18 is noticeably more compact and handy compared to these two models, as these devices are slightly wider and taller. Nevertheless, in terms of length, all three devices are almost the same, with a total length, including the battery, of about 100 centimeters. Okay, this attachment is also 2 or 3 centimeters shorter, but I would say the difference is so small that it can be neglected here. Consequently, we naturally have a certain difference in weight between these three models. And it's the same as with any other device. The lighter it is, the better, because it's anything but pleasant when my arm starts to ache after 10 minutes. That's precisely why I weighed each device separately, of course, with a large battery attached to the back, as we want to make everything as realistic as possible. This means using a large 5 amp-hour battery for the two 18-volt models and two 4 amp-hour batteries for the 40-volt model. And here are the results. The 18-volt model is, of course, the lightest, and with 3,150 grams, the device is really not heavy. Surprisingly, the 40-volt model, the UX 01, comes next, weighing approximately 4,450 grams, which is significantly heavier compared to this model. Lastly, in the test, we have the 36-volt model, the DUX 60, which is 50 grams heavier. So we have a total weight of approximately 4,500 grams. which means the difference between these two models is not as crucial compared to the pure 18-volt model. However, it should be mentioned that these three devices have a different center of gravity. As I said, the 18-volt model is the lightest, and if we take a look at the device, we can see that the center of gravity is almost in the middle of the handle area, even though there's no attachment at the front yet. It's slightly different with these two models. Here, as I mentioned, the large batteries are attached at the back, and when I try to lift the device in the handle area, we can see that the center of gravity is somewhat here at the back of the machine. The same goes for the 40-volt model. The center of gravity is also quite far back. This means that the standalone machines are not well balanced. But of course, I will always attach an attachment to the front. Otherwise, the device won't be of much use to me. And if I have a heavy attachment at the front, the heavy batteries at the back of the machine contribute positively to weight balance. This means that the center of gravity is shifted slightly forward again, which we don't see as strongly in the pure 18-volt model. Speaking of the battery, I suggest we stay at the back of the machines because, as you can see, this is where the battery compartments of the three multifunctional drives are located. As I mentioned before, the two devices over here are LXT devices. That means we need 18-volt batteries for these two multifunctional drives. The 40-volt batteries or 14.4-volt batteries do not work with these two devices. Furthermore, it's worth mentioning that for the 18-volt drive, we logically only need one 18-volt battery, while for the 36-volt drive, two batteries are required. And for both devices, I would always recommend using large batteries, meaning 18-volt, 5 ampere-hour batteries for maximum power. Next to it, we have the 40-volt model, the XGT device, which requires a 40-volt battery, also a nice large battery with 40 volts and 4 ampere-hours. Furthermore, the battery compartments of these three models are almost aligned identically. As you can see, with the 18-volt model, the battery compartment is positioned so that the battery is inserted from the top and automatically locks in place. However, this has the disadvantage that we can no longer see the battery status indicator on the back of the battery because we have a metallic protective cover here at the bottom that prevents it. It's slightly different with the DUX60, the 36-volt model. Here, the batteries are inserted into the machine from the side. This means that, as can be seen here, the battery status can still be easily read from the side. In this regard, it's quite positive. And finally, the 40-volt model. Here too, the battery is inserted from the top, just like with the DUX18. But here we have the great advantage that the 40-volt batteries have the battery status indicator on the top, allowing the battery status to be easily read directly on the battery. Furthermore, it's worth mentioning that all three models have a black metallic protective cover on the bottom, which helps protect the battery. This means if I installed the battery and accidentally hit something with the multifunctional drive, the battery is not directly affected. It also protects the battery when I set down the multifunctional tool. In this case, it's very practical and present in all three models. Additionally, as you can see, the 40-volt device has a large black hook instead of the metallic cap. This makes it possible to simply hang the multifunctional tool somewhere, which is unfortunately not possible with this model, the 36-volt model. Let's continue with the centerpiece of these three models, namely the built-in motor, this turquoise box at the back. As you can see, the DUX18 is again the most compact, really beautifully understated. Next is the 40-volt model, slightly larger, and I'd say the 36-volt DUX60 drive is the bulkiest. Nevertheless, it should be noted that all three models or all three motors are brushless motors, meaning they're more efficient than conventional brushed motors. Also worth mentioning, all three devices are XPT certified, which stands for Extreme Protection Technology, as Makita calls it. This means they're suitable for outdoor use and are also protected against splashing water. Directly in front, we can see the handles of the three multifunctional drives. And here, I must say that all three devices are almost identical in terms of handles, meaning they're equally comfortable to grip. As you can see here, They're black with rubberized coating, making them very non-slip. Here are the key controls present on the top of all three multifunctional drives. Highlighted in red, the large release button. This release button is identical for all three devices and is automatically activated or unlocked when I grip the handle. Therefore, no difference can be observed in this regard. The next difference, however, can be found when we look at the underside because that's where the trigger of the multifunctional drive is located. It should be mentioned that the two newer models, the DUX18 and the UX01, are identical in terms of the trigger. That means they have the same shape and design. Everything is almost identical for these two models. Only the older model, the DUX60, looks slightly different here. The red lever is somewhat more fragile, but overall, I would say that I cannot derive any advantages or disadvantages from it. On the other hand, things look a bit different when we take a closer look at the additional control and display elements of these three multifunctional devices. As clearly shown, on the far left is the DUX18. Here, there doesn't seem to be much. The entire control panel is very clear. We only have a small membrane button in the middle, which is our on-off button. Pressing it briefly, we can see that we are currently in the second speed level and can easily switch to the second speed level. In contrast, it's a bit different with these two models. Here, everything is noticeably larger and we have more options. Let's start with the DUX60. As you can see, the on-off button is located at the bottom, just like with this device. Holding it down briefly, we can see that the device is activated. Up here are the three speed levels, and also available on this model is a reverse gear. And finally, the 40-volt device, as you can see, the entire control panel or display panel is designed significantly larger. The buttons, the two membrane buttons, are also much larger and, in my opinion, easier to reach than on these two models. That means once activating the device here, we have the three available speed levels and a reverse gear is also present. It's also important to mention the difference between these three models in terms of how long the multifunctional drive remains active once I've activated it. It should be said that these two devices are identical in terms of the mechanism. That means when I activate the device here, as you can see, I'm in level number 3, and then I briefly press the trigger, and shortly after, the device automatically deactivates itself. The same process applies to the DUX18. However, with the DUX60, it's slightly different. As I mentioned, I need to hold the button down a bit longer, and you can see that the device is activated. And it remains on until I deactivate it manually. In my opinion, this is a significant advantage since otherwise one would have to reactivate the device after each short use. This was probably introduced in these new models for safety reasons. I found it more convenient with the DUX60 compared to these two models. Lastly, for all three multifunctional drives, at the very front, we can see the attachment and the handle. As you can see, each of these multifunctional drives has a black plastic handle, a rough grip. In my opinion, it can be gripped quite well. Although it's not rubberized, it is lightly textured, making it somewhat slip resistant, and it is a round handle. This means we can hold the device both like this and like that, in almost any desired position. Furthermore, it's worth mentioning that each multifunctional drive comes with a matching Allen key stored right here on the handle. This allows for the variation of the handle position. We can mount it at the front or at the back, depending on the attachment we have or simply our arm length. The attachment system of the three multifunctional drives is also completely identical. If we take a closer look at the attachment, we can see the small release button in red at the top. As the name suggests, this button is used to unlock the corresponding attachment. Simply press it briefly and we can pull out the attachment. Directly in front, we can see the slot for the attachment, where it's inserted, marked again with an arrow. Completely identical and very important, on the right side, we have the large clamping lever. This lever is used to secure the attachment. So, to lock the attachment, we open the clamping lever, insert the attachment, and then close the clamping lever, ensuring that the attachment is securely locked. Therefore, these three attachment systems are truly identical, and we don't have any device-specific attachments or the like. We can use any attachment on any multifunctional drive. However, I'd say that there's definitely a slight difference in this regard. As mentioned, some attachments require more power than others, and for this reason, if you have many power-hungry attachments, it's definitely advisable to opt for the more powerful multifunctional drive. And precisely for this reason, I'd say let's now move on to the practical test to see how these three multifunctional devices perform in comparison and how significant the difference in power is. So sit back and let's begin with the comparative test. And now let's move on to the practical test. Let's take a detailed look at the three MAKITA cordless multifunctional drives in comparison. So, it's MAKITA DUX18 versus DUX60 versus UX01. To ensure that each device can deliver maximum performance and to obtain comparable results, I used large 18-volt batteries with 5 ampere-hours for the two LXT devices. For the 40-volt device, I used a large 40-volt battery with 4 ampere-hours. By the way, each battery was fully charged before the test. As for the test attachments, I decided to use the trimmer attachment EM408MP and the cultivator attachment KR401MP. The latter was intended as the ultimate extreme test. For that purpose, I selected a small patch of grass where the grass had already grown to a height of about 80 centimeters. As you can see, this is not your typical run-of-the-mill test, but rather a significant challenge for the three multifunction drives. Now, let's see how the drives perform. With each multifunction drive, I mowed a strip of approximately 2 meters wide in the tall grass. Starting with the least powerful device, the DUX18, I didn't encounter any major issues. The machine had enough power to trim the tall grass reliably. However, it should be noted that there was occasional slight power loss, especially when dealing with thick clumps of grass. Additionally, due to the decreasing speed, the long grass would sometimes wrap around the spindle and had to be manually removed. It took some time with this device until I reached the end, but overall, the results are quite satisfactory. In comparison, let's move on to the 36-volt DUX60 drive with the same procedure. What stood out, especially compared to the DUX18, is that this drive is significantly stronger. You can feel it in both the better pulling power and the higher load capacity. The DUX60 also had no problem cutting the tall grass, but did so with greater ease than the 18-volt drive. Furthermore, I had no issues with the thick, matted clumps of grass. And finally, the 40-volt drive, where one would expect that not much would change. At least that's the theory, but in practice, things are slightly different. With the 40-volt device in hand, there was actually a small power boost compared to the 36-volt multifunction drive. Not as significant as compared to the 18-volt device, but still noticeable. In terms of power, the 40-volt model completely overshadowed the previous two devices. Consequently, the progress was impressive, and the entire area was mowed in no time, with no noticeable power loss even when dealing with thick clumps of grass. To push things to the extreme, I subjected all three multifunction drives to the cultivator attachment KR401MP. In terms of power, I expected the same results as before. The 40-volt drive delivered excellent performance and impressive pulling power. It loosened the compacted soil without any complaints, and even small roots posed no problem. The 36-volt model had a similar performance. It also had enough power to loosen the compacted soil and cut through smaller roots. However, compared to the 40-volt device, there was a slight decrease in power. Finally, in last place, we have the 18-volt DUX18 model. This device definitely struggled with the cultivator attachment, but the results were still respectable. Regular power drops were not uncommon, but, of course, one should not expect the same performance as the 40-volt drive. However, it's worth noting that the DUX18 was the lightest and most portable device in the test. In conclusion, all three devices delivered quite good performance. and there was a noticeable difference in power. The 40-volt drive clearly had the advantage, although the difference compared to the 36-volt model was relatively small. The advantage: you only need one battery, just like with the 18-volt model. On the other hand, the 18-volt model is the lightest and most compact device in the test, which makes it very pleasant to work with. What do you think? Which multifunction drive would you choose and why? Feel free to write it down in the comments below. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please show your support by giving it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel for free and activate the bell icon to stay updated on new videos. You can find the current prices in the video description below. Thank you very much for your support. With that, I'll say goodbye and see you next time. Take care. Goodbye.